Death descended upon the imported Italian marble, yet Gabriel Valenti's dark eyes never left the terrified plus-sized waitress, gripping a spilled tray. Everyone else ran screaming. She just stared back. That night, Chicago's most ruthless crime lord asked her one impossible question, and her answer shifted the entire criminal underworld. Sweat pooled at the base of Beatrice Lawson's neck as she navigated the impossibly narrow pathways of Franco's trattoria on West Taylor Street. She was a fat woman, a fact she never tried to hide, mostly because society never let her forget it. At 300 pounds, Beatrice took up space in a world that constantly demanded women shrink themselves. Her hips bumped against the edges of oak tables, her thick thighs chafed beneath the cheap polyester of her uniform skirt, and her feet throbbed with a dull, incessant ache after 10 hours on the floor. Yet paradoxically, her size made her completely invisible. People did not look at Beatrice. They looked through her. To the wealthy patrons of Chicago's most notorious Mafia-linked restaurant, she was part of the furniture. A sweating, breathing table piece that refilled their water glasses and cleared their empty plates. She was the butt of muttered jokes from the kitchen staff and the recipient of pitiful condescending glances from the rich wives draped in mink coats. But being invisible had its advantages. When people assume you are stupid just because you are heavy, they say incredibly dangerous things right in front of you. Beatrice knew exactly who was laundering money through the restaurant's accounts. She knew that Councilman Harrison was sleeping with his secretary, and she knew that the kitchen manager was skimming off the top of the truffle oil orders. More importantly, she knew exactly who Gabriel Valenti was. Gabriel was the heir to the Valenti crime syndicate. He was a man of lethal grace, with dark, calculating eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Unlike the loud, boisterous mobsters who threw around hundreds to show off, Gabriel was terrifyingly quiet. He always sat at table 9, his back to the wall, nursing a single glass of neat whiskey. Tonight, the air in the trattoria felt different. Thick. Heavy. Beatrice carried a tray of veal parmigiana toward table 9, her breath hitching slightly as she approached. Gabriel was not alone. Sitting across from him was Richard Moretti, a rival boss from the South Side, whose reputation for erratic violence preceded him. Richard was a rat-faced man, sweating profusely, despite the December chill outside. 2 massive bodyguards flanked Gabriel, while Richard had brought 3 of his own. The tension was suffocating. "You're making a mistake, Gabriel." Richard sneered, his voice a low, grating rasp. "The docks belong to me. My father built that territory." "Your father built a legacy," Gabriel replied smoothly, his voice a rich baritone that commanded immediate silence. "You, Richard, built a liability. You are sloppy. Sloppy men attract feds, and feds are bad for business." Beatrice stepped up to the table, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Your veal, gentlemen," she murmured, her voice soft but steady. Richard didn't even look up. "Get out of here, Shamu. Can't you see men are talking?" He spat, waving his hand dismissively. His knuckles brushed against her waist, and he pulled his hand back as if he had touched something vile. Christ, Franco needs to hire girls who don't eat half the inventory. A hot flush of humiliation crept up Beatrice's neck, a familiar burn she usually swallowed down, but before she could step back, she saw it. Gabriel's phone buzzed on the table. For a fraction of a second, Gabriel glanced down at the screen. In that infinitesimal window of distraction, Richard's hand hovered over Gabriel's whiskey glass. Beatrice's sharp eyes caught the subtle flick of Richard's thumb, unstopping a tiny glass vial hidden in his palm. A fine white powder dissolved instantly into the amber liquid. It was seamless. If she hadn't been standing directly above them, staring down to avoid eye contact, she never would have noticed. Gabriel looked back up, entirely unaware. "We are done negotiating, Richard. You hand over the shipping logs by midnight, or we escalate." Beatrice stood frozen. The ambient noise of clinking silverware and murmuring patrons faded into white noise. Her brain worked in overdrive. If she screamed, Richard's men would draw their weapons. If she said nothing, Gabriel Valenti would drink cyanide, or whatever toxic cocktail Richard had just dropped into his glass, and die right in the middle of her section. The resulting gang war would tear Chicago apart, and she would undoubtedly catch a stray bullet in the chaos. She needed to act. Not as a hero, but out of pure, pragmatic survival. Beatrice shifted her weight. She feigned a stumble, letting her thick hip crash heavily into the corner of the heavy oak table. The impact rattled the wood. "Oh my goodness, I am so clumsy." Beatrice gasped loudly, her hands flailing. She reached out to catch herself, and in a deliberate sweeping motion, her heavy palm knocked directly into Richard's glass of red wine, sending it shattering across his lap. "You stupid fat cow!" Richard roared, shooting up from his chair. The dark wine stained his $1,000 silk trousers, dripping down onto the marble floor. His bodyguards instantly reached inside their jackets. "I am so sorry. Let me clean that, let me get you fresh drinks," Beatrice babbled, playing the part of the panicking, incompetent waitress perfectly. Without waiting for permission, she snatched Gabriel's poisoned whiskey glass and Richard's empty water goblet, sweeping them onto her tray alongside the broken shards. "Get away from me!" Richard bellowed, swatting at her. Gabriel raised a single hand, stopping his own men from drawing their guns. His dark eyes flicked to Beatrice. He didn't look angry. He looked deeply, intensely curious. He had seen her stumble. But a man who observed everything knew the difference between a genuine accident and a calculated strike. Beatrice scurried away toward the kitchen, her heart pounding, a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She dumped the poisoned whiskey straight down the drain of the industrial sink, running the hot water tap over it for 10 seconds. She had just saved a Mafia boss, but the real danger, she realized with a sickening drop in her stomach, hadn't even started yet. 10 minutes later, the restaurant had descended into an eerie quiet. Richard had stormed off to the restroom to attempt to salvage his ruined trousers, leaving Gabriel alone at the table. Beatrice took a deep breath, smoothing her apron over her stomach, and picked up a tray with a fresh, perfectly poured glass of whiskey. She walked back to table 9. Gabriel was waiting. He hadn't touched his food. As Beatrice set the fresh drink down, his large, scarred hand shot out, wrapping around her thick wrist. His grip was not painful, but it was absolute. An iron shackle. "You didn't trip Beatrice," Gabriel said. It wasn't a question. He knew her name. That detail alone sent a shiver down her spine. "I saw your eyes before you hit the table. You were looking at my glass. Then you were looking at Richard." Beatrice swallowed hard. She tried to pull her wrist back, but he held firm. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Valenti. I'm just clumsy. My balance isn't great. Do not insult my intelligence, and I will not insult yours," Gabriel murmured, leaning in slightly. The scent of expensive cologne and danger rolled off him. "Richard slipped something into my drink. You saw it. And instead of screaming, instead of running, you threw yourself into the table and took his abuse to get the glass away from me." Beatrice stopped struggling. She looked down into his dark eyes, abandoning the facade of the frightened, dim-witted waitress. Her posture straightened, drawing her full height and width commanding the space she occupied. "If I screamed, his men would have shot up the dining room," Beatrice said, her voice dropping the high-pitched panic she usually used to placate angry customers. "My kitchen manager is hiding behind the bar, crying. I have a busboy whose wife just had a baby. If a firefight breaks out, innocent people die. So I handled it quietly. Gabriel studied her face. He looked at the soft curve of her jaw, the intelligence burning behind her tired eyes. For a moment, the bustling restaurant vanished, and it was just the two of them trapped in a dangerous orbit. Then Richard marched back out of the restroom, his face purple with rage. "This suit is ruined. Valenti, we're done here. You'll have my answer tomorrow." He signaled to his men. "Wait, Richard," Gabriel said smoothly, finally releasing Beatrice's wrist. "Before you go, let me offer you a drink to apologize for my waitress's clumsy mistake." Gabriel gestured to the fresh glass of whiskey Beatrice had just placed on the table. "Drink with me, to future negotiations." Richard scoffed. "I don't drink cheap swill." But the arrogant mobster wanted to show dominance. He reached out, grabbed the fresh whiskey glass, and brought it to his lips. "To your downfall, Gabriel." He downed the amber liquid in one gulp. Beatrice's breath hitched. She watched Richard's throat work. 5 seconds passed. 10. Richard took a step back. A sudden, violent tremor racked his body. His eyes widened in absolute terror as his hands clawed at his own throat. He choked, a horrific gurgling sound escaping his lips before collapsing heavily onto the imported Italian marble floor. His body seized violently, blood frothing at the corners of his mouth, and then he lay entirely still. Screams erupted from the remaining tables. Chaos exploded. Richard's bodyguards drew their weapons, but Gabriel's men were faster, putting 3 bullets into the ceiling. "Lock the doors," Gabriel commanded, his voice slicing through the panic like a blade. "Nobody leaves." Beatrice stood, frozen, holding her empty tray. She looked at the dead man, then at Gabriel. Gabriel stood up slowly, stepping over Richard's lifeless body, and walked until he was mere inches from Beatrice. He loomed over her, a dark shadow of death and power. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small empty glass vial, the exact vial Richard had used. "He dropped this under the table when you bumped him," Gabriel whispered, showing it to her. "I smelled the bitter almond on the glass you took away. Cyanide." Beatrice felt a cold sweat break out across her forehead. "You knew." "Of course I knew," Gabriel replied softly. He stepped closer, backing her up against a structural pillar. "Which brings me to my problem, Beatrice. You are a waitress making minimum wage. You are treated like garbage by everyone in this room. You owe me nothing." He reached out his knuckles lightly, tracing the soft, flushed curve of her cheek. It was a gesture so intimate, so terrifying that Beatrice forgot how to breathe. "So I am going to ask you one question." Gabriel continued, his eyes locking onto hers with terrifying intensity. "And your answer will determine whether you walk out of this restaurant alive tonight." The heavy silence stretched between them, drowning out the frantic sobbing of the patrons huddled on the floor. "If a powerful man stands before you," Gabriel asked, his voice a lethal velvet whisper, "a man who kills, extorts, and corrupts, and you have the chance to let his enemy murder him, right in front of you, washing the city clean of his sins, why do you save the monster?" Beatrice looked at the dead body. She looked at the terrified rich patrons hiding under their tables, the same patrons who had called her a cow, who had laughed at her sweating in the kitchen, who had never once seen her as a human being. Then she looked directly into Gabriel Valenti's eyes. She didn't blink. "Because a monster who tips 20% and says, 'Thank you,' is better than a saint who spits on my shoes," Beatrice answered coldly. "The good people in this city look at me and see a fat joke, Mr. Valenti. They see a waste of space. But you never looked at me with pity. You just saw a woman doing her job. You're a monster, sure. But you're a monster with manners. And in my world, Loyalty goes to the one who treats me like a human." Gabriel stared at her. The silence stretched so long that Beatrice was sure she was going to die. She braced herself for the gunshot. Instead, a slow, dark smile spread across the Mafia boss's face. It was a terrifying, beautiful thing. "You don't belong in this diner, Beatrice," Gabriel whispered, stepping back and gesturing for his men to clear a path to the door. "Grab your coat." Snow crunched beneath Beatrice's cheap rubber-soled shoes as she followed Gabriel Valenti out the back door of Franco's trattoria. The freezing Chicago wind whipped through her thin polyester uniform, but she barely felt the cold. Adrenaline, thick and metallic, pumped through her veins. She had just watched a man die. Worse, she had allowed it to happen. And now she was stepping into the back of a bulletproof Cadillac Escalade with the city's most feared syndicate boss. Inside the SUV, the heavy doors clicked shut, plunging them into absolute soundproof silence. Gabriel poured 2 glasses of scotch from a crystal decanter in the center console. He handed one to Beatrice. She took it, her hands trembling slightly, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "You are shaking, Beatrice." Gabriel noted his voice, a low, soothing rumble in the dim light. "But your eyes are entirely calm. It is a fascinating contradiction. I am currently sitting next to a man who just orchestrated a murder via my serving tray," Beatrice replied, taking a slow, burning sip of the scotch. "I think a little trembling is a perfectly rational physiological response. What do you want with me, Mr. Valenti?" "Gabriel," he corrected smoothly. He leaned back against the plush leather, observing her with a predatory stillness. "As for what I want, I require an asset. My syndicate is bleeding. We have a rat, someone feeding information to the feds and to rival families like the Morettis. I have torn my inner circle apart, trying to find the leak, but whoever it is, they are careful. They know how to hide from my men." Beatrice scoffed a bitter sound, escaping her lips. "And what does that have to do with a waitress from the West Side? I don't know anything about your criminal empire." "Exactly," Gabriel said, a dark smile playing on his lips. "You know nothing of our operations, which means you belong to no faction. But more importantly, Beatrice, you possess a superpower that money cannot buy." She raised an eyebrow. "Being aggressively overweight. Being invisible." Gabriel countered, leaning forward. His proximity made her breath hitch. He reached out his thumb, gently brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "Society has trained people to look past you, to dismiss you. Because you do not fit their narrow, pathetic definition of value, they assume you lack intelligence, perception, and danger. You hear things. You see things. You noticed a sleight of hand tonight that my highly trained bodyguards missed. I want to put you in rooms with my enemies. I want you to be my eyes and ears." Beatrice stared at him, stunned. He wasn't dragging her into his bed or locking her in a basement. He was offering her a job, a wildly illegal, insanely dangerous job. "If they catch me spying, they will kill me," she said bluntly. "They will never catch you," Gabriel promised, his eyes darkening with possessive intensity. "Because you will be with me, and no one touches what is mine." For the next 3 weeks, Beatrice's life transformed into a surreal fever dream. Gabriel moved her into his sprawling, fortress-like estate in Lake Forest. She was given a suite larger than her entire apartment building. But the biggest shock was not the wealth. It was the way Gabriel treated her. He brought in Clara Hughes, a renowned private tailor from Manhattan, demanding an entirely new wardrobe for Beatrice. When Clara instinctively tried to suggest dark colors and vertical stripes, the universal uniform meant to slim down fat women, Gabriel immediately dismissed her suggestions. "She is not hiding," Gabriel growled, standing in the doorway of the fitting room as Beatrice stood awkwardly in a silk robe. Dress her in emeralds, in deep reds and gold. Emphasize her curves. Make them look at her and make them realize she is untouchable. Beatrice felt a hot flush of emotion. For 28 years she had been told to shrink, to diet, to cover up, to apologize for the space she occupied. Gabriel Valenti was demanding that she expand. He looked at her thick thighs, her soft stomachs, and her full hips with a hunger that made her entirely weak in the knees. However, not everyone at the estate shared Gabriel's fascination. Lorenzo Rossi, Gabriel's underboss and oldest friend, despised her. Lorenzo was a sharp-featured, bitter man who wore bespoke suits and carried himself with a terrifying arrogance. She is a liability, Gabriel. Lorenzo snapped one evening in the study, unaware that Beatrice was sitting in the adjoining library, entirely obscured by a massive leather armchair. You are bringing a fat civilian into family business. The other captains are laughing at you. They think you've lost your edge keeping a charity case as a pet. Let them laugh. Gabriel's voice was icy, carrying the promise of violence. And Lorenzo, if you ever speak of Beatrice with that tone again, I will personally remove your tongue. Do we understand each other? Silence stretched out before Lorenzo muttered a stiff, "Yes, boss." Beatrice clutched the book in her lap, her heart pounding. Lorenzo was angry, and angry men were sloppy men. She decided right then that Lorenzo Rossi was the first person she was going to watch. The annual charity gala at the Drake Hotel was the one night a year where Chicago's political elite and its criminal underworld openly rubbed shoulders. Mayors drank champagne with extortionists. Judges laughed with money launderers. Beatrice stepped out of the Escalade, and the flashing lights of paparazzi momentarily blinded her. She wore a custom, deep, ruby-red velvet gown that hugged her heavy breasts and flared beautifully over her wide hips. Diamonds cascaded down her collarbone. She looked like royalty, a stark contrast to the identical surgically enhanced, painfully thin wives of the other mobsters. Gabriel offered his arm. He looked lethal in a jet-black tuxedo, but his eyes softened as they raked over her. "You look magnificent," he murmured, pulling her close. "Are you ready? Just point me toward the lions," Beatrice replied, her chin held high. Inside the ballroom, the strategy began. Gabriel played the terrifying, charismatic leader, drawing a crowd of sycophants and nervous rivals. Beatrice played her part perfectly, the quiet, slightly overwhelmed, heavy-set companion who desperately needed to sit down near the potted palms. She found an alcove near the private VIP smoking balcony. Slumping into a velvet chair, she let her posture sag, taking on the persona of a tired woman whose feet hurt. A wealthy socialite walked past, rolling her eyes in disgust at Beatrice's sprawling form. Perfect. She was completely invisible again. 10 minutes later, the heavy curtains leading to the balcony rustled. Lorenzo Rossi stepped out into the shadows, followed a moment later by Councilman Thomas Gallagher, the very man Beatrice knew was laundering money through Franco's trattoria, and two large men she recognized instantly. They were Moretti soldiers, the men whose boss had died on the restaurant floor. Beatrice froze, her breathing shallow. The balcony door was cracked open, just enough for the freezing wind to carry their hushed voices directly to her. "It happens tonight," Lorenzo hissed, his voice trembling with anxious energy. "Gabriel is weak. He's distracted by that oversized cow he brought with him. When the gala ends, he takes the private elevator to the underground VIP garage. Gallagher, you make sure the security cameras in Sector 4 are looped." "Done," the corrupt politician muttered. "But what about his personal detail?" "I've reassigned his main drivers," Lorenzo replied. "My men will be waiting in the tunnel. We light up the Escalade, and the Valenti Empire is mine by morning. The Moretti family gets the south side ports back, just as we agreed." Beatrice felt the blood drain from her face. Lorenzo was the rat. He had orchestrated Richard Moretti's poisoning, perhaps hoping Gabriel would take the blame. But when Gabriel turned the tables, Lorenzo scrambled to arrange a direct hit. She didn't panic. She didn't scream. Beatrice stood up, slowly smoothing the velvet over her hips. She slipped away from the alcove, moving through the crowded ballroom with a surprising, fluid grace. She found Gabriel holding court near the ice sculpture. Catching his eye, she gave him a very specific, slow nod. It was their prearranged signal. I found the knife in the dark. Gabriel immediately excused himself, stepping into a quiet hallway where Beatrice was waiting. "Lorenzo," she whispered, her voice steady but urgent. "He sold you out to the Moretti remnants, and Councilman Gallagher. They're ambushing you in the underground garage. He reassigned your drivers." Gabriel's jaw locked. A terrifying, demonic rage flashed in his dark eyes, but it vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, calculating mask. He looked down at Beatrice, and the anger gave way to absolute awe. His underboss, a man who had stood by him for 20 years, was a traitor. But the woman society had deemed worthless had just saved his empire and his life for the second time. "Stay here in the main lobby," Gabriel commanded, softly cupping her face and pressing a fierce, bruising kiss to her forehead. "Do not move until I send my personal guard for you." Beatrice watched him walk away, dialing a number on his phone. He wasn't calling for an escape. He was calling his executioners. An hour later, the gala ended. The news rippled through the high society crowd in hushed, panicked whispers. There had been an incident in the VIP parking garage. A gas explosion, they said. 4 men dead. Councilman Gallagher was reportedly missing. Beatrice stood by the grand staircase, her heart hammering, until the massive glass doors opened, and Gabriel walked back in. His tuxedo was impeccable, though there was a faint smear of soot on his white cuff. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as Chicago's undisputed king walked straight past the millionaires and politicians, heading directly for the fat woman waiting by the stairs. He didn't just offer his arm this time. Gabriel dropped to one knee right in the center of the Drake Hotel lobby. Gasps echoed off the marble walls. Gabriel took Beatrice's trembling hand, kissing her knuckles. "Every man in this city thought they could outsmart me," Gabriel said, his voice carrying clearly into the deadly silence of the room. "But they made the fatal mistake of looking right past you. You are my eyes. You are my equal. You are my queen." He stood pulling her flush against his chest right in front of the stunned elite of Chicago. Let them stare. Let them whisper. Beatrice Lawson was no longer invisible. She was the most powerful woman in the underworld, and the monster beside her would burn the city to ashes before he let anyone make her feel small again. Are you blown away by Beatrice's genius and Gabriel's absolute loyalty? This is why you never underestimate someone based on their looks. If you loved this dark, satisfying Mafia romance and want more intense stories where the underdog takes over the empire, smash that like button, share this video with your best friend, and subscribe to the channel right now. Drop a comment below. What would you have done at the gala?